were no battles near Fort Scott in late September of 1862, which could have contributed to his death. So we can only assume that he had traveled over 1,000 miles to get sick on his arrival. His body never made it back to Ohio. In the Fort Scott National Cemetery lies a Windham boy, willing to serve his country and wanting a taste of adventure while doing it. At least Luther had a little touch of Windham with him as he passed, because he had a buddy with him, Charles H. Johnson, 3 years younger, who had enlisted in the 2nd Cavalry with him on that same hot August day in 1861. They traveled to Fort Scott together, and they got sick together. We know that Luther died in September and is buried in Fort Scott. According to Civil War records released just this week on Ancestry.com, Charles was sent home to Windham on January 25th, 1863. Somewhere between Kansas and Ohio, he died. His body never made it to Windham, and where he rests is anybody's guess. And that's a coin from the Ohio 2nd Cavalry. And I have absolutely nothing to show you about Charles Johnson other than the fact that there were 2 Windham boys out there in Kansas. Another Windham boy died in 1863. The soldier that we have always known as G. Miller on the monument is only one of several who have incorrect information on that monument, undoubtedly caused by misreading those worn stone engravings. His real name was not G. Miller. It was Charles Miller. He was 19 years old, and on October of 1861, he joined the 41st Ohio Infantry, a 3-year outfit organized at Camp Wood in Cleveland and commanded by General William Babcock Hazen, a Hiram boy who had gone to West Point. Now, Hazen wasn't very popular with his troops, who thought that he was harsh and dictatorial. But once they got into battle, their opinion of him rose as they understood how well he had trained them. The state of Ohio did not provide soldiers with weapons until after they had their basic training. Prior to this, the men were using whatever weapons they may have brought with them from home or acquired on their own. The men hated the official issue rifles, however. They were provided with what came to be called Greenwood rifles, which were old smoothbore muskets and rifles that were reconditioned and rebored by a shady outfit in Cincinnati. The weapons were functional, and they would serve the men in battle, but they felt that they were unreliable and they couldn't shoot straight. But they were good enough for Charles Miller to survive the Battle of Shiloh and Corinth. And the men were promised new Springfield Model 1861 rifles in the spring of 1863. Charles Miller never got to lay down that hated Greenwood rifle that he had. At the Battle of Stones River, known in the South as the Battle of Murfreesboro, Miller was wounded on New Year's Day, 1863. He wasn't alone in being wounded. Total casualties in that one battle were 29,000. 13,000 on the Union side and 16,000 Confederates. Considering that only 76,000 men fought there, this is the highest percentage of killed and wounded in any major battle of the Civil War. Higher in absolute numbers than the infamous bloodbaths at Shiloh and Antietam earlier that year. Miller lingered in agony for a month in a Army field hospital in ready Gettysville, Tennessee, located on the Stones River, where he died on February 9th. He never made it home. In October of 1865, the 111th United States Colored Infantry disinterred and reburied him, along with 6,000 other Union soldiers, in the Stones River National Cemetery. But Miller didn't have to die friendless and alone. He had a Windham buddy with him. Charles Griffin, who was 1 year older than Miller, had mustered into the 41st Ohio with him. Griffin was a little more ambitious than Miller and had risen to the rank of sergeant when he lost his friend at Stones River. The war still dragged on, and in January of 1864, they were offered the opportunity to go home for 30 days, provided that they re-enlisted for the rest of the war before they left. Well, Charles Griffin signed on, and when he returned in March of 1864, he found that he had a new overall commander. His name was William Tecumseh Sherman, and he intended to bring the South to its knees by cutting a wide swath through its heart. Charles Griffin helped burn Atlanta. If you have ever seen Gone with the Wind, Windham was represented. Sherman moved on to Marietta, Georgia, but Charles Griffin wasn't with him. He was left behind at an Army hospital, mortally wounded. He hung on for a month and finally expired in late July of 1864. Like his buddy Charles Miller, he served well, but he never made it back to Windham. The real tragedy of the Civil War was that so many kids died young. A young Windham boy enlisted in the 6th Ohio Cavalry on October 3rd, 1863. The 6th Cavalry, organized at Camp Hutchinson in Warren, had fought in the Second Battle of Bull Run and was sure to see a lot of hot action. He was barely 18 years old, but he was ready for war. 3 months later, he was dead of an illness in a Cleveland hospital. And by the time his name was carved on the Village Green Monument 2 years later, nobody knew his real last name. The monument calls him W-H-P-O-N-N-E-L, Ponnell. His regimental records list him as William H. Pummell, P-U-M-M-E-L-L. And his own tombstone in the Windham Cemetery reads William H. P-O-M-E-L. He's the only Windham soldier in the cemetery that has no military emblems on his grave. Now his tombstone deepens the mystery. It said he is the son of J and L, P-O-M-E-L. Now that's a fourth spelling for this guy. But buried in that same grave and sharing that tombstone is Susan A. Fleming, daughter of J and L Fleming, F-L-E-M-I-N-G, died October 12, 1864, aged 2 years, 4 months. Her parents, Jerusha and Lucinda, that's the J and L, are buried a substantial distance away from the girl, and their tombstone spells Fleming with 2 M's. So who was this dead 18-year-old? Was he an orphan, taken in by the illiterate Fleming family, who had no idea how to spell his own, or even their own, name correctly? And how did William feel when he left a family with a dying toddler who passed away only 9 days after he left? Those are things we'll never know. Any more than we will know what killed 3 Windham soldiers, all members of the 171st Regiment of the Ohio National Guard, of illness within a month of each other. If we can believe the monument, 62 Windham men, ranging in age from teens to 40-year-olds, marched out of Windham on April 27, 1864. They expected to be back long before the fall harvest. They left in April. They expected to be back before harvest, because they were what we call 100 days men. They were National Guard, not infantry, not cavalry. They weren't supposed to go into battle. In fact, they received very little training at all. 16 days of training is what these men received, because they were supposed to be janitors, supply clerks, guards, laborers, freeing up the veteran brigades to do all the heavy lifting, to do the fighting, and to bring this unholy war to an end. 100 days, men. They'd be back before fall.